Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. And welcome to another sub segment, Fictional Women Around the World, Halloween edition.
Ooh.
Yes. And today we are talking about Sally the Ragdoll from the 1993 film, Another Anniversary, which we keep running into. Hey. Yeah. Which is the stop-motion animated film, The Nightmare Before Christmas, first voiced by Catherine O'Hara. I just watched this movie the other day. When I was a kid, it scared me so bad. I don't think I watched it again until after college.
The first time I ever watched it, I think, was last year.
Oh, really?
Because I don't care for animations. I don't care for Tim, what's his face?
Tim Burton. Mm-hmm.
I said it. So I've never watched any of his, outside of like the old school. So definitely watched Beetlejuice.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely watched Edward Scissorhands.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's it, though.
Yeah?
Although he does have some surprising movies that I didn't realize was his.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe I have, and I didn't realize it. So, like, I'm not a big Johnny Depp fan, so definitely not going to watch that. But I finally watched this last year, which, by the way, I just saw a recent TikTok saying that the children are named after their deaths.
Yeah.
That made me really sad.
It's a dark film.
It's so dark.
In a lot of ways. I mean, when I was a kid, I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, I was like, oh, well, okay. Well, dang.
Well, I watched it the other day, and I was just thinking about this because I was like, oh, 'cause I see this character come up so many times, definitely in like goth spaces. When I was going to Hot Topic in high school, Sally. I have some pajamas actually that I got from Hot Topic.
Oh.
Yes. And this film and this character did really resonate with a lot of people. There has been a lot of debate and disagreement about whether her character is a good or bad role model. We'll talk about that at the end. Outside of the film, she has been featured in comics, books, and video games, including the Kingdom Hearts series, which I loved. Sally's song, the song she sings in it, that it is called Sally's Song, has been covered numerous times, including by Evanescence frontwoman Amy Lee, which I forgot until I was researching this. There's also a line about it in the Blink-182 song, I Miss You, which I was very good at on my karaoke game that I had on PlayStation. Halsey will alternate with Catherine O'Hara as Sally in an upcoming live production of The Nightmare Before Christmas at the Hollywood Bowl. Apparently, they've been doing this for many years. If any listeners have been, let us know. Billie Eilish sang the role a couple of years ago. The costume was allegedly inspired by Selena Kyle, Catwoman from Batman Returns, which is another holiday movie that we did. You can see our episode on it. But yeah, let's talk about this character. When we first meet Sally, who is a patchwork ragdoll made of found fabrics. Her dress is made of found fabrics, and she is stuffed with dead leaves, living in Halloween Town. In the film, she longs for independence. Her creator, controlling mad scientist Dr. Finkelstein, definitely a reference to Dr. Frankenstein, keeps her locked up in his tower, though she has tried to escape several times. After the Halloween party, she manages to get away from him by undoing the thread on her arm, and she dismembers her arm. She does this a lot, but due to her nature, she is able to put herself back together. She secretly follows Pumpkin King Jack Skellington and her crush up to the moonlit Spiral Hill and hears him sing about how he isn't happy with Halloween anymore. He's bored, basically. Sally returns to the doctor for her arm, and once it's reattached, she tricks and poisons the doctor so she can go to the town meeting that Jack has called, where he gushes about his experiences in Christmas Town. A little unsettled, Sally heads back to the tower where the scientist locks her up, but Sally escapes by jumping out a window with a basket of food and drink, and in doing so scatters her body parts in the fall, but she easily reattaches them. She gives the basket to Jack, but flees out of shyness. While plucking the petals of forget-me-nots, she sees a vision of a Christmas tree bursting into flames. She goes to warn Jack, but he dismisses her concerns. Desperate to put an end to Jack's plan to take over Christmas, on Christmas Eve, Sally whips up a batch of fog-making potion so that she will be unable to take off in his sleigh. However, Jack's dog Zero foils her plan when he illuminates his nose, red nose, and lights the way. Once Jack is gone, Sally overhears how terrible his Christmas is being received, like the military is talking about shooting him out of the sky, and decides to rescue Santa Claus, who's being held prisoner by town villain Oogie Boogie. Sally formulates a plan which involves distracting Oogie with a flash of her, unbeknownst to him, dismembered sexy leg. She almost succeeds in freeing Santa, but is captured herself. Jack, realizing what he's done, returns to Halloween Town and fights Oogie, frees Sally and Santa Claus just in time for him, Santa Claus, to save Christmas. But not before Santa issues a stern warning that they should listen to Sally because she's the only one with any sense around here. Jack is on the verge of revealing his feelings for Sally, but they are interrupted because they have to have that scene in every movie. But eventually, they both make their way to the Spiral Hill and reveal their feelings for each other, hugging and kissing. The end. Or is it? Because we're not going to go in depth on this because I haven't read these things. But in the comics and books, they get married and maybe have kids, like 4 kids.
I didn't know this was a comic.
Yeah, comics and book. I think that's after the fact, but yeah.
Oh, okay.
She becomes the Pumpkin Queen, and she was the only one who never gets fooled by Oogie, but gets kidnapped a lot. She rescues Zero. I'm not sure. Well, listeners, let us know. It came out, the book, The Pumpkin Queen, came out, I think, last year. So it's pretty recent. But there is some stuff I wanted to talk about with this character because I have been watching, I'm behind on my Halloween movies because I've been so busy. But that means I've been like watching, when I have the chance, a ton of them at once. And I think that overload of Halloween/horror movies brought me back to that point. Lauren and I did a whole episode on it before you came on as host, Samantha. Why didn't you believe her? It shows up in like every horror movie. I swear to God, there is a woman who is like, this is bad. We shouldn't do this.
Don't do this.
And they're all like, it's under control. I know what I'm doing. And it was very present in this movie. And it's interesting because this is her like crush, her love. But she's also not really chill with going along with this plan. She tries to foil it a lot. We're going to talk about that more in a second. Another thing I found with the whole article about recognizing abuse, and it was using this movie as an example, and it was saying like, the doctor's controlling behavior, his verbal abuse.
It was disturbing to me.
Oh yeah, it was very disturbing. Like ownership and entitlement. So here are some quotes from him. "You want me to starve an old man like me who hardly has strength as it is? Me to whom you own your very life?" Like very much manipulative, like saying, I will die without you, you have to stay. Here's another one. "You're mine, I made you with my own hands." And then later when he's like dissatisfied with Sally, he makes a new version of Sally that he says will be an improvement. He puts like half his brain in her, I think. And then there's like examples of physical abuse, like locking her up, strapping her down, and holding things important to her so she has to come back, like her arm. There's no support in the town. Like he's definitely not meant to be seen in a good light, but it's very disturbing for sure. And that brings us to the next point, that she is defined a lot through her relationships to men in her life. She is like a damsel in distress, I guess, because she was the smart one. She was the one that was like, this is bad, this is wrong. I'm going to need to fix it. I'll do it myself. But still ultimately did need Jack to rescue her. That whole idea of meant to be, which I believe is what my pajamas say, they became like a really romantic couple, like especially for goth emo kids. Like it was like, oh, Jack and Sally, which is why it's in that Blink-182 song. And I have actually some different points about that, some different quotes of people who disagree. So here's one from Romper. The whole thing plays out like a narcissist wet dream, the story of a man who, in spite of a great folly, gets to retain his status as compelling and beloved genius, winding up with the quiet, mousy girl who underplays her own ingenuity to worship him. Looking at it from Sally's point of view, it's basically vicarious wish fulfillment for every quiet girl who ever loved the lead singer in a band. I will say, I found this article had like a lot of interesting points, but a lot of them, sometimes you read an article that's like, let's talk about sexism in a thing, and it feels like the article's kind of being sexist. And this had a few examples of that. I'm not saying that was the case. There were just a few where I was like, wait a minute, wait. They also tried to make the point that Sally is a stalker, which I think is a fair point, but also, I don't know, she's just kind of like wandering around.
Yeah, she discovered that he's doing something bad and was like, oh, maybe I need to keep an eye on this.
Yeah. And she was very shy and like, don't get me wrong. If I don't know if the genders had been reversed, but to me it felt less stalkery, more like she was trying to build up the courage, and then Jack is singing this song and she's like, oh no, that's a bad idea. Wait a minute.
Maybe I need to stop this.
Yes. And here's a quote from Marvelous Geeks Media. Unlike everyone else, she refrains from showering Jack with constant praise and adulation. Being in love doesn't mean ignoring the object of your affection's faults or staying quiet when they're about to make a huge mistake. Sally is the only one who tries to dissuade Jack from taking over Christmas, imploring that he give up on his plan to no avail. And in this, they point out some quotes from Sally's song. A lot of people did that, where she's kind of like, I wish I could just go along with him, but I can't. It's wrong. Doesn't work for me. Jack Skellington is that guy who did a single study abroad semester in Christmastown and thinks he knows everything. The one who assumes that because he's really, really good at one thing, he must be equally good at anything else he wants to do. Everyone else is so far up Jack's bony ass that they're either enamored with everything he says and does, or too intimidated to say otherwise. Still, it's Sally, the person who actually loves him the most, who has enough respect for him and her own intelligence to tell him the truth. That was a lot of funny quotes from that article, right, which is the Marvelous Geeks one. Here's a quote from Bustle. Sally even gets her own song, but the subtext of said song is, I don't see any of this working out, including my feelings for that ridiculous man over there. That very much goes against the classic doe-eyed hope of Snow White or Cinderella. They were making the point that she's technically a Disney princess because Disney owns The Nightmare Before Christmas.
Is she? Is she considered that?
Well, I mean, just technically, a lot of people like to fight about it, but she's in the Disney realm of what would be
leading ladies.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Often princess. Not that Sally is void of positivity or doe eyes, but she's very heavily married to realism and not waiting for her prince or king to save the day. I mean, that guy is actually causing all this trouble in the first place. So yeah, she has a crush, but she doesn't passively stand by and dwell on it. Instead, she pushes herself to act for a better cause, making a valiant effort to rescue Santa Claus. And then I thought this was really interesting. This is a quote I got from screenwriter of the movie, Caroline Thompson, but I got it via Den of Geek. If she were writing the character now, Thompson said to Al Horner, she would give Sally even more of her own self. With the ending in particular, she feels she let the character down somewhat. I felt like that's where I kind of threw her under the bus as a less than character, where she was sort of enmeshed and enslaved in her adoration of Jack. I wouldn't have used those words at the time, but in retrospect, I think that's what I was feeling.
Huh.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting from the screenwriter. Yeah, I would say it's definitely the end always kind of feels like, oh, they're kissing now to me.
I mean, it's kind of that whole level of like, you can't just leave it be. They have to be like, the man has to somehow trump.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I kind of felt that same way about completely different genre, but the newer version of Mad Max.
Mm-hmm.
Like it could have just been left alone, but you still needed that dude to be the one that rescues and sacrifice himself.
Right. Right. And it's still like, as most people rightfully pointed out, it's still Jack's story. She's not the center of this story. And while she does have plenty of moments where you're like, okay, cool. Yeah, I like that. I like that. She's still ultimately kind of there to prop him up.
Right.
And play a role in his story. So a lot of people have written a lot about this character, as you might be able to tell. Yeah, and I didn't know it was the 30th anniversary.
We always do this.
I know. A lot of movies. My friend and I we were watching Hocus Pocus, and I was like, a lot of movies came out in 1993. And we went on this whole rabbit hole of like, oh, this one too, and this one too. So a lot of anniversaries this year. But yeah. I would love to hear from listeners if you have any thoughts about this. I gotta go find my pajamas, see what they say on them. You can email us with thoughts or suggestions for this segment at stuffmediamomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at momstuffpodcast or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff Mom Never Told You. You can find us on TeePublic, where we have merchandise and we have a book you can find at stuffyoushouldreadbooks.com. Thanks as always to our super producer Christina, executive producer Maya, and our contributor Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your favorite shows.